A little girl was talking to her grandmother one day and noticed how big and gawky her wedding rings looked. She said, "Grandma, why when you got married did they make the rings so big?" She said, "Because when I got married, they made rings so that they would last." We live in a day when rings don't last, when marriages end regularly and quickly, or where they just don't mean anything anymore. But that goes against what we said when we got married. We stood before a preacher or before some official, and we promised in good times and in bad, for better or for worse, richer or for poorer, sickness and health, and then we had the nerve to talk about how long. For as long as we both shall live. And then we told the biggest lie, so help me God. We even brought God into it. So we lied on earth and in heaven. And that's because a key word is missing. Either it's not used or it's misunderstood or downgraded, even if it is used. It is the secret sauce word of the kingdom. Remember, the purpose of marriage is God's kingdom purpose, where a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, come together in unison under divine authority in order to replicate his image and expand his rule through their individual calling. That's the definition of a kingdom marriage. But there's a secret sauce, a special word that if you grab this word, the power of this word, the meaning of this word, the application of this one word, it will lead to the transformation of the relationship and the establishment of the kingdom authority God wants your marriage and home to have. That word, that special word, is given to us in Malachi chapter 2, verse 14. Because in that chapter where he's speaking to people who are divorcing, who were leaving their spouses, he says to them, because God was rejecting their worship, but you say, for what reason? Because the Lord has been a witness against you and the wife of your youth, against whom you've dealt treacherously, though she is your companion by covenant. That's the word. The word is covenant. That is a theological word that is embedded into the kingdom foundation by which marriage is to be understood. Many people today get married by contract, not by covenant. They get married by convenience, not by covenant. But God says you are married by covenant. Throughout the Bible, when God wanted to establish something official in which he was involved, he would call it a covenant. A covenant may be simply defined as a spiritually created bond. A spiritually created bond. It's a glue by which a relationship would be established, whether it was God establishing it with the nation Israel. He made a covenant with them. He made a covenant with Abraham, the Bible says. He made a covenant with David and David's household. He makes a covenant with the church. It's called the New Covenant. And he calls marriage a covenant. In other words, whenever God wanted to do something officially, you and I would say today, legally, he would establish a covenant. Notice the word companion by covenant, because covenants were connected with relationship. In other words, you can enter into a contract with somebody with whom you do not have a personal relationship. Now, you can do a contract because the business deal looks good, but not a covenant. A covenant assumes something. It assumes a companionship. So there was a relationship that was official. We call it marriage. People get married in principle because they're in love. So there's this companionship piece, but it's been made official through a covenantal process. So to get this word is no small thing. This is a spiritually binding relationship that that God makes with his people, which he calls covenant. Let's review. How did the first marriage take place? God created the husband. God put the husband to sleep. God took out the husband's rib. God fashioned a woman from the husband. It says God brought Eve to Adam. He plays Cupid. He hooks a sister up and hooks a brother up. And he plays matchmaker in the first marriage. Most people get married in a church because in principle, they want God to be part of the relationship. So they use a church or say, so help me God, because in principle, they know God should be a part of this in some form or fashion. Well, God wants to be part of it and established it to be part of it. That's why he was involved with it when he first created it, because he never meant for him to be included in the ceremony and be left out on the honeymoon. He meant to be a part of the relationship because it's covenantal and covenants are divinely established. So I want you to understand this word covenant today, because if you get this one, it changes everything. Now, let me say it again. The purpose of a covenant was the administrative mechanism in which to establish a kingdom. So kingdoms have covenants in order that the kingdom may function as the kingdom was designed to function because of the covenant. So to understand and apply covenant is to experience kingdom, and kingdom was the reason marriage was established. So you follow the logic? Amen. Covenant administers kingdom. Kingdom is why marriage was established. Happiness, which is what you want, rolls out of this. Even when God established it, he said, let them rule. And then the next verse says, and he blessed them. The blessing that we all want to come out of marriage comes out of this covenantal understanding of kingdom, which is the purpose for marriage. Therefore, having said this, we want to explain to you the ingredients of a covenant. All covenants have 5 ingredients. Okay? You stir these 5 ingredients together, and you've established kingdom in the home. Number 1, all covenants are divinely established. The theological word we give to this is the word transcendent, meaning God rules over it. A covenant, God rules over. He is the final arbiter and say-so related to the covenant. In other words, what he says goes, because it's his institution. That's why you say, so help me God, because it's underneath that. The best way to understand this covenant is, let me give you a synonym for it, covering. A covenant covers. So covering. So, an umbrella. When it rains, you take out an umbrella to cover you. That umbrella doesn't stop it from raining. It just stops it from raining on you because you're undercover. So God says, I will cover you if you're operating underneath the umbrella of my rule. That is, if you establish the fact that I make the final decisions about you individually and you collectively as a marriage couple, then you get my covering. So it should not surprise us that Satan wants to remove you from the umbrella so that you get wet. Because God's covering only happens under the covenant. And the covenant only happens under the covering. So the enemy has got to move one of you or both of you outside of that umbrella so that you're no longer covered. Because as you'll learn as we go along, if you're no longer covered, you're on your own. Wow. You're on your own, the relationship's on their own, And all of that is the result of it. So God must be the final authority. You got all these court shows on television like Judge Judy and these different court shows. In order to get on those shows, you have to agree to something. You have to agree that the judge's decisions are final, whether you like them or not. Okay? If there's going to be a desire to appeal and debate, you can't get on those shows because Judge Judy's decision is final. Now, some people are happy, some people are sad, some people like it, some people don't. That's irrelevant. Because Judge Judy or whoever the judge is, that decision is final. In order to be under the covenant, God's decision must be final, whether you like it or not. So let me warn you. There are a lot of things God's going to tell you you don't like. Just like there are a lot of things that your kids don't like. But what do you say? It ain't but one mama here, ain't but one daddy here. You establish authority. So to operate under the covenant says God rules. He's the final arbiter of all decisions. Now you'll understand as we go along why that's important. The final arbiter of all decisions in the relationship because you're operating underneath the covenantal rule of God. Now, what's that got to do with divorce? Because this passage is about divorce. He says here, I hate divorce. Jesus said, let not man put asunder what God has joined together. In order to get a divorce, you go to a man. It's called a judge. And you give the judge authority to cancel what God okayed. Because when you got married, you said, so help me God. You said, for the rest of my life. But the folk who go to God for marriage don't go to God for divorce. They go to a man for divorce. And they let that man called the judge overrule God. God is so sticky about this issue of a man ruling over him that he says, if you get divorced illegitimately, that is for a reason that God has not agreed with, and God does allow divorce for certain limited reasons, and you let a man overrule me, I've not canceled the previous marriage. So he says in Matthew 5, verses 31 and 32, that when you do that and you enter into another relationship, he says you're in adultery. And then he says the person you divorced, when they enter into a relationship, they're in adultery. Now, in other words, you done spun this thing now to 4 other people, or 3 other people, including you, because you have canceled something I haven't canceled. But that's because I'm not ruling. But you say, but I can't live in this misery anymore. Well, first of all, you have to ask the question, did we ever get married in the first place? In the right way, covenantally. So, God must rule. Secondly, second aspect of a covenant is chain of command. We call that hierarchy. A chain of command means that you're operating along a certain order. Now, a lot of folks have a trouble with this, but follow me on this. God has an order, and if you leave his order, you leave his umbrella. And he has an order for everybody, including himself. 1 Corinthians 11:3 says, Jesus is underneath God, the Father. Every man is underneath Jesus. A woman is underneath a man. So even though Jesus is equal to God because he's part of the Godhead, when it comes to function, not when it comes to his being and his person, he's equal to God. He claims deity. But when it comes to functioning in history, he comes underneath God. That's why when Jesus was on earth, he says, lo, I've come in volumes of books to do thy will, O God. He kept saying, I've come to do my Father's will, because that was a functional term. So apart from him dying on the cross, you never see Jesus operating independent of his head. The Bible calls it headship. Headship means governing authority. He says a woman comes under a man comes under Christ. So, let me tell you a little secret. One of the reasons our marriages aren't covered is because one or both parties have left the umbrella. Either the man is not coming under Christ or the woman is not coming under the man. And a lot of times the woman's not coming under the man because the man's not coming under nobody.
Right.
So you have a breakdown. Nobody gets away from the principle of hierarchy because it's a principle of representation. Whoever is over you represents you. Whoever's over you is supposed to represent you. So the father represents the son represents the man represents the woman, and the parents represent the children. It's an order. Break the chain, you lose the blessing. Thirdly, they have rules. There's a rule for the husband. We're going to give you one word when we get to this session, and there's a rule for the wife. One word. When you understand the rule and the app working out of that rule, and you operate according to the rule, then you get what the rule is designed to give you, and the covenant is designed to provide for you. Here's what you can't do in the covenant. You cannot make up your own rules.
Right.
Okay? You can apply the rules differently, but it's the rule you're applying. A lot of us who are parents have trouble in our home because we have kids who want to make up their own rules. So what does that mean? That means there's going to be a conflict. I was having trouble with my daughter one year. My daughter was giving me a headache. Crystal wasn't paying attention. I shouldn't have given her name. But one of my daughters was giving me a headache, and I was telling her to do something she didn't want to do, and she stomped off and walked away from me. I said, "Excuse me? Where you think you're going?" And she said, "I'm going to my room." I said, "No, you going to the room I let you sleep in. This is not your room. You don't pay no bills around here." We had to get stuff back in order, okay? Okay? Because when you lose the order, you have conflict. Next, there are sanctions, or the blessings or cursings, or the benefits or loss of benefits that come from what you did with the rules. So when you break the rules, you lose the blessing that God promised to come with the relationship. So the thing you're looking for, happiness, joy, fulfillment, that you're hoping marriage will give you, you can't get because one or both parties are breaking the rules. And these rules are not complicated. You're going to see the rules are not complicated, but they're critical to establish the benefit of the covenant. The final one is the inheritance. The long-term benefit, the generational repercussion. Remember, we're to replicate the image of God. How we handle the rules not only determines how we fare, but how our children fare, even to the third and fourth generation. We're experiencing today problems with the third and fourth generation because the rules have been broken in the first generation. And so when the parents have broken the rules and not fixed it, it goes down to the children. And so you see children repeating what the father did, what the mother did. A lot of women are living in rebellion because they saw their mother living in rebellion, or they saw their father abusing their mother, and they wind up becoming abusers too, because that thing rolls over and becomes a consequence of the covenant. So what I am suggesting to you today is that when you understand and grab a hold of this principle of covenant and come underneath the rule of God, you will have victory in what may today look like defeat. Somebody is not operating under the covenant. Now, when you carry an umbrella, sometimes the way you walk in, you move it a little bit and you get a little wet. But when you get a little wet, that means I got to readjust.
Right.
I got to readjust, okay? So if your marriage is getting a little wet, getting rained on, okay, don't try to stop it from raining. Don't try to stop it from raining. You don't have authority over the rain. Well, what you can do is adjust to the umbrella. Because the umbrella, whilst not stopping the rain, will stop it from raining on you. One of the great stories I like about the power of covenant in the Bible is David and Goliath. Okay, there was a war, conflict. Goliath was challenging Israel, and this was a giant. Some marriages have giant problems. The giants, we can't fix this. It can't be resolved. I can never forgive this. I can never overcome this. I can never live with this. And it's a giant. And one of the things about a giant like Goliath is he wouldn't go away. It says day after day after day, he kept coming back, intimidating God's people. God's people had God, but God wasn't working for them. Here comes little David, teenager at this point. And David asked a question, and he asked it twice. He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he is threatening the armies of the living God? He says it again. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who threatens the armies of the living God? He said, well, what's it got to do with marriage? What's it got to do with covenant? Everything. Because he said, Goliath, as big as he is, hadn't been to the doctor. He hadn't been circumcised. He ain't been to the doctor. Now, this giant was huge. He's at least 9'6" tall. Everybody else was intimidated because they're looking up here. David looking down there. And David said, he ain't been to the doctor. Meaning, he's not covered. So even though he's big, he's not covered. And because he's not covered, we can whip him.
All right.
Or we can beat him. So let's get God's covering, and no matter how big the giant is, he's going to fall. I don't know what giants are in your marriage. What big things that look like they cannot be overcome because they're 9'6" full of armor and a sword. And all you got is a slingshot and a stone. But if you ever get clarity on your problem being uncovered and you being covered, you've changed the equation and you just now have gone on the offense. Because David, it says, ran up to Goliath and said to Goliath, in the name of God, we're going to defeat you.
Right.
Many of you saw my daughter in the war room. And even though there were problems in the marriage that looked like it was going to destroy the home, she went into her war room with a covering. And God created scenarios to overcome all the things that were about to destroy the marriage. Counseling couldn't do it. She had somebody in her life who got her back under the covering,
Right.
which brought God back into the relationship and overcame the rebellion of the husband. Because I don't care what your giant is. When you get under cover, you now tell the rain what it's going to do with you.
Right.
Let's get under the covenant so we can begin to have authority in the marriage. God bless.